following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
Tonight, we discuss gender-based violence in Sri Lanka. Does the law provide adequate protection against violence directed towards the most vulnerable in our community? And what more must be done to further such protections? A very good evening and thank you for taking the time to join us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we bring to you key legal concepts and break it down for the layman. Now, tonight's topic is something that surprisingly we haven't discussed much in the past with our past programs, but it's something very relevant and something that continues to be under public scrutiny and debate over millennia over our society's developing, and that's on gender-based violence. Now, this topic is a bit of a taboo for a lot of us because we don't really talk about the issues, what goes on behind the scenes, specifically when it's related to gender as well. And of course, the legal effects, the legal protections that are provided and the consequences of such issues being perpetrated in our society. And to talk about this issue, we have someone that I believe is very well suited for this subject, extremely new on the program, but definitely not prone to disappoint. And that is attorney at law, Thiruni Marambe. Ma'am, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here today. A little bit of an introduction on Ms. Marambe. She is an attorney at law with an LLM from the University of Colombo, and she's very well suited for discussions like this, so it's safe to say that we're in good hands for this specific topic. But before we get into the topic, let me guide you through the basic structure that we're going to be anticipating. First, we'll be talking about the basics of gender-based violence, what exactly is it, and then we'll be talking about the current context in Sri Lanka, how it is prevailing, and finally we'll be talking about the international context, specifically Sri Lanka, when compared to the rest of the world.
Hello, my name is Kavindi Kulatilaka. I'm a law student at Sri Lanka Law College. So my question is based on fundamentals. What is gender-based violence and what legislations there are outside?
Well, we have quite a lot to get into the discussion. Ma'am, once again, thank you very much for taking the time. We have a lot to unpack. But before we do, ma'am, if you could give us a little bit of an introduction into this entire topic, because it's very vast and it encounters and encompasses a lot of areas. Could you explain to us what exactly gender-based violence is?
First and foremost, I would like to convey my thanks to you for inviting me to this program. So as you put it right, this is a very wide area. It's a very broad topic to talk, and we could be split into many areas. But still, the importance should be always, like many, as you said rightly, it's a taboo kind of a factor. So no one would like to speak about it in public sphere. But still, this is a universal concern. Gender-based violence is definitely a universal concern. Plus, it's a human right concern too, right? So the people who get affected by this, so it's not only the moment you hear the term gender-based violence, we tend to get into women, right? But no, it's regard to both men and women too. But so they equally, like it's basically the impact of gender-based violence is as a result of certain incidents due to omissions, decisions, and as well as your day-to-day approach in respect of certain factors. You're attacking someone's bodily integrity, psychological integrity, as well as you degrade their status in the society or in respect of for certain circumstances, right? So therefore, it brings an unimaginable individual damage to a person. However, when it comes to biologically speaking, due to biological reasons as well as other social, cultural and religious, if you look at it in that angle, women had become the most vulnerable group of people. in respect of gender-based violation, right? Gender-based this very factor. So they have become the most vulnerable target for many reasons. So this had been studied by psychologists, sociologists, as well as feminists. So they had represented this topic under many variations, and it indicates the seriousness of it. And at the same time, it's very disappointing to say that there are so many silent victims because of certain factors in the sense mostly the cultural and the social factors. They always prefer to remain in silent, right? So then when it comes to defining the term, what is gender-based violence, the term itself indicates the meaning of it. Upon your gender, you are going to get subject to violence, right? So as I said, put it earlier, it's mostly the women. It attacks to your integrity and self-esteem, right? So self-esteem, so attacking one's self-esteem is such an unfortunate moment because it completely damages your personality. So on that basis, so this is a very important topic to speak in public sphere.
Right. I think that's a perfect background and a synopsis into, and some context into what exactly gender-based violence is. Because once again, as you mentioned, ma'am, when we think of gender-based violence, immediately our thoughts go to, obviously, women. But it might not be as obvious. Yeah. It's gender. It doesn't specify if it's women. Yeah. But because of the current context and the connotations we have, it ends up turning out to be a true fact rather than just an assumption. Yeah. I think because we got a good look into what the background is like and what gender-based violence really is, it's important for us to go into our context now legally. When it comes to Sri Lankan law, ma'am, could you please explain to us where the legislature is located for certain aspects relating to gender-based violence? I'm aware that it's not just one act and it's in multiple sources. Could you walk us through that, ma'am?
Yeah, so it's important for us to classify what sort of violation that comes into this main heading on the topic of gender-based violence. So then it could be in form of physical violence, psychological, socio-economic levels, and verbal plus sexual violence, right? And also when it comes to the modern times, cyber gender-based violence is the most predominant factor that daily basis that we could hear. So then that is one thing, as well as so we can, like if you take these components, we can add these into several kind of segments, kind of factors like domestic violence and even workplace violence, right? So then, I hope that when it comes to the prevailing law, mostly the gender-based violence is focused on domestic violence, because within domestic violence you could see many of these components, physical, verbal, psychological, as well as sexual violence, right? So then, so if I talk about it in a more sociological angle, when it comes to the present context, if you take the family unit, a marriage is seen as a partnership, right? So then you give equal importance to both husband and wife in order to carry out that union. But not only in Sri Lanka, as I said, this is a universal factor. Maybe again for cultural and sociological reasons, still we could see a dominant subordinate or superior submissive relationship between husband and wife.
There's a power dynamic.
Yeah, power dynamic. So it could be for many reasons, especially for financial reasons, right? So dependence, a lack of education, lack of awareness, as well as lack of resistance, importantly, right? So then they naturally become silent victims. And that's the very category mostly who will get a obvious exposure to this threat of violence. So as a matter of fact, most of this gender-based, the moment you hear that term gender-based violence, we turn to the domestic violence factor. So Sri Lanka, we have law in the legislature, Act number 34, Prevention of Domestic Violence, 2005. So that is one of them, because it says when it comes to a woman, because of vulnerability, especially for the reasons of lack of education, financial instability, and tolerance, they become very easy victims. And more than that, they hesitate to bring about this as a complaint and to go on with the legal proceedings and all that. So therefore, there's no kind of like, even though we might have a perfect piece of a legislation, but then how welcoming the victims to come forward and put their story. If they are not willing to come forward, there's no potential development in the legal system. There cannot be, because law is always looking for an instance to come and address, like to coordinate that moment. For that you need a complaint. For that you need some grievances to be reported. So that is very much absent due to socio-cultural factors in this part of the world.
Right. I think it's very important that you mentioned socio-cultural factors as well, ma'am, because unfortunately, as you mentioned, when we think about gender-based violence, the first thing that people think about when we subcategorize, it's domestic violence, which is, again, an unfortunate truth, because there should be no violence occurring in a domestic setting. I think because you mentioned about the socio-cultural aspect, if we could delve a little bit further into that, how exactly do you see gender-based violence being either more or less perpetrated through our culture?
Because it's mainly the family unit. So if you take the procedure that you have to go through, I personally believe that's not so friendly, victim friendly. It's very mechanical. So this is a very sentimental, and for the person who go through this, who experience this, it's an embarrassment moment. It's a very such traumatic and embarrassing moment. So then lawyers have a pivotal duty to assist them, not to get over or get through these complex legal factors, but also to be more sensitive, to address their mentality, to make them comfortable, and to ensure that they are secured within the hands of the procedure. So that's the reluctance and that's the uncertainty. Most of the victims, so in certain times that we don't see many proper statistics. So then we wonder, then is it a perfect system, or do we don't go through this actually? No, it's like because of the silent sufferers or silent victims, because the system is not welcoming them to come forward. So I repeat it again, legal-wise, legislature-wise, you can easily put things perfectly. So when you open the book, the statute, the black letter law could be perfectly written. It's just that you have to come and get the benefit of it. But once you turn to take the benefit of it, then the crises that you have to go through, the discomfort that you may have to go through is not secured or looked after, or not the concern of anyone.
Right, exactly. And also the fact that we need initiative in order to even carry forward with the laws that we have. Ma'am, we are running out of time in the first segment, but before we conclude, I'd like to ask you, apart from the Domestic Violence Act that we have seen come into action, are there any other key pieces of legislature you think puts more of a spotlight on gender-based violence?
As I said, cyber bullying, cyber gender-based violence, that's a very complex area. So there again, laws are there. Certain institutions are there, police institution, and there are specific areas completely allocated for such. But still, again, for the stigma and family factors, the hesitation is there. So compared to Western countries, actually, especially Asian countries, so there's obviously that hesitating is there. Very
Right,
much presented.
because the subject in itself is taboo to our cultures, especially in this hemisphere of the globe. I think that's a perfect aspect for us to unfortunately go in for a break. We do have to talk a lot about the current context as well, and also what we have seen developing in real time relating to gender-based violence, and what we've seen the judicial system and the legal system actually do for the most vulnerable group in our society. But before we get into any of that, let's go in for a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back.
Hello, I am Ganganath Gambhir. I am a student at Sri Lanka Law College. My question is, on the current context, is Sri Lanka's judiciary and legal system adequately equipped to handle gender-based violence?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in discussion with Ms. Thiruni Marambe, attorney at law. We were just talking about gender-based violence, ma'am. I think our first segment was quite a summative one, where we actually had a lot of context brought into what gender-based violence actually is. And now that our viewers have a bit more of an understanding on where the legislature mainly is and what we actually see as gender-based violence being reported across the country, I think it's important for us to go into the practical aspects and the current context. So if you could explain to us, ma'am, what role the judiciary and also our legal system plays in when it comes to law enforcement agencies, also when it comes to the prevention or maybe the detection of gender-based violence and that entire process. Could you explain that to us, ma'am?
Yeah. So as I said in the earlier segment, that lawyers, so that they are the very first group of people that who are going to get hold with this when it comes to a victim complaining. So from that onwards, that you have to give them the comfort of facilitating them the confidence that okay, you're in safe hands and you can go on with this, because it's a very complex moment, and it's according to by taking the Sri Lankan structure, the process structure, it is time consuming and it is a very lengthy process, right? So then but the problem is, so that itself is going to bring a bad impact on such victims, because during the time with this very particular space, they may go through so many changes in their life, right? So then maybe they may enter into marriages or some other factors that may affect them. If they have filed a case, if this is going on, is it hearing in the court of law and so on. So that the time factor is a obvious barrier of obvious discouragement for them to get involved into such process, because and the family support, most of the time the family won't encourage. So that actually it needs for them to bring themselves into an public sphere and to get that confidence in order to declare what had actually happened to this person and to discourage such happening in future. So the judiciary plus the legal sector, entire legal sector, has a much of a, like, they have a utter responsibility to immediately work on this, because otherwise more you delay the developments or improvements of this, not that mechanism, but this the sentimental approach to this, there will be silent sufferers as well as your nourishing abusers. Then when they come to realize, okay, due to such barriers and due to such moments, delays and so on, they're certain, okay, they're not going to go ahead with a complaint. So I'm secured for a next target kind of an issue, right? So then that's how you nourish, so a culprit, right? So then at the same time, through our omissions, decisions, as well as our day-to-day approach towards certain factors, consciously or unconsciously, everyone mostly contributes to gender-based violence.
What can we see, ma'am, now when it comes to the current context? I think this is something we'd like to know. You just mentioned that the process in itself is a very lengthy one and quite emotionally, physically, financially taxing for the victim, when really it should be the opposite, where we are going to be giving swift justice to the people. Has there been developments in the current context in Sri Lanka where we have seen an attempt to expedite the process or an attempt to shed more light on this issue?
Yeah, under the present context, with the current government, maybe under obviously the leadership under the president, there are certain bills that they have drafted in order to eradicate gender-based violence. One is gender equality bill, plus empowerment of women's bill, right? Empowerment of women's bill. So then, so they are kind of the content of those will definitely, it seems to be have covered most of the areas. So as I told you earlier, the most felt legislation for all this time was the domestic violence. So that's the only area that we are very much focused on the moment we hear the term gender-based violence. So the violence, the women based factors were very much concerned under that, especially under domestic spheres, under matrimonial relationships, plus because even when it comes to Domestic Violence Act, even the parents were declared as perpetrators, right? So then all domestic sphere factors covered in that act. But when it comes to these two bills, I hope they were positively addressed to most of the troubles or the worries that we have under present context. Under Women's Empowerment Bill, sorry, I should mention the word bill, yes, not yet, that is turned into a parliamentary act. So Women Empowerment Bill, they are going to establish a special commission for women. Again, with certain expertise, knowledge and so on, to address to such issues, the current or the most predominant issues that worries women, mostly in respect of their vulnerabilities to be easy targets of this gender-based violence. Apart from that, there is a plan to establish care centers, women care centers, by taking into account the security of women, psychological and security reasons of women. They are going to establish care centers within 10 selected districts. Apart from that, further to that, there is a helpline. I hope it's currently existing. That is, there's a women's helpline, which is currently where they can complain about.
People can actually lodge complaints through it, which is obviously extremely helpful and also convenient, because it's much easier to actually ring up a hotline than physically go and admit to something that's very traumatic. Ma'am, before we go into the rest of the discussion, I'd like to ask you a question of curiosity. Of course, it is an aspect that is quite sensitive and not something that we can completely compete on the matter, because we might not be falling into these categories. But in your opinion, when it comes to ethnic minorities in this specific demographic, the most vulnerable demographic, and when it comes to the violence in such minorities under gender-based violence, do you think there's enough conversation in that aspect, or is there enough being done, or do we have more to do?
Yeah, that of course something that in present context we don't see much. Maybe due to political reasons, right? Some other, again, all these sentimental and emotional factors attached to, even though we go by a very much a liberal mindset, so we do not take them forward to talk about lively and in our day-to-day life. So when you say ethnic minorities, they have their own certain factors of rituals and so on. So that again, culturally, there are women who are a part of it. They suffer a lot, right? So then, but they themselves justify that's the barrier for them to get over from it. But the new trend is transgender, that also fall into a minority category. Transgender abuse, that again falls into a minority category, where again not focus much in order
There's
to
not
present
enough
their
light being
interest.
shed.
Yeah.
There's not enough transparency or awareness in that aspect at all. I think it's important now that we understand that there are aspects that are still in the dark when it comes to gender-based violence, even though it is a topic that's been widely spoken across the globe. Could you tell us, ma'am, we just spoke about certain implementations that are in the process, in the works by this current government in order to actually establish some sort of haven or protectionism rights for minorities and of course vulnerable groups for gender-based violence. In the current legal context, where do you see the biggest shortcomings?
Shortcoming is the procedure barrier. That is the obvious thing, that the moment, as I told you earlier, you can draft law perfectly, you can capture the shortcomings perfectly, but when it comes to in reality, when you put it to work, the mechanically, how you capture those things and how you attend to it is the grand barrier that we have. So for that, you have to there should be sufficient training for it in respect of the officers who have to daily basis deal with it. So they have to have more sympathy and empathy towards
has to be a humanized process.
Because actually correcting it through law is not much of a barrier. You can, it's a matter of pointing it and suggesting it by way of bringing it and to correct that accordingly. But that again, you have to have a proper positive approach by the people of the system, they themselves, especially the victims. One of the reasons why Western law they have turned into a very liberal ideology of law is they never resist, they always complain. So zero tolerance, even for when it comes to slightest verbal harassment, there's zero tolerance. So that itself what upgraded their status as women, or in like whatever capacities that they are holding, they are enjoying today. The reason is their voice. So voicing matters a lot. So we belong into an Asian culture now. We always have a trend of veil of ignorance. You ignore things, you let it go, and passiveness. So that's the barrier actually. So in order to overcome from that, if you have a very sentimental approach, if you have a more liberal approach in respect of addressing to such, many troubles could be easily sorted.
We have to be more robust with all aspects when it comes to, and not be passive, as you mentioned as well, in order to raise the overall standard of what it is to be of a targeted minority or targeted vulnerable group in this country.
Yes.
I think now that we spoke about developments that we are seeing and also the shortcomings and how hindered the entire process is, if you could enlighten us, ma'am, if there are any recent cases or any landmark cases that you think actually define certain aspects that we have seen being translated in gender-based violence cases. Have you seen any landmark cases of that sort?
Not specifically in respect of the general analysis of it, but under domestic violence. So the focus is more into that. Like if you take, like there are like, if you take the segments of it, cyber within the cyber sphere. So there are many factors, but then again the question is how far they are willing to go ahead with it, right? So on the at the end of, at the middle of it, middle of the matter, they just turn back, right? So that is one of the factors that we could obviously see in the whole process of the judiciary process. So domestic violence matters, of course, like maybe the partners want to separate after claiming such, and they go ahead with it. But in gender stance, with the general approach, maybe as a result of a stranger approach and also on, they don't want to actually. Yeah, that's why our rates are, our kind of statistics are very low in respect of the ultimate decision making, ultimate convictions in relation to gender-based violence per se, and that's why you don't hear it much as a common factor. So half of the way they stop.
Exactly, and we have a lot of grey statistics, grey figures, dark figures, where we don't see reporting, and it's just completely swept under the rug overall by a society that doesn't want to address that there are actual issues when it comes to this concept. We do have to talk about the international context as well and how we stand in comparison to the rest of the world and what we're doing to actually either better that standard or maybe we're going in a good path and we just have to keep it up. Before we get into any other discussions about the international context and how important it is that we actually try to adhere to some standards of a global context, let's go in for a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am Sudeepa Inandini Senratna. I am a student at Sri Lanka Law College. My question is on the global scenario. Does Sri Lanka meet international standard relating to gender-based disparities?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in our final segment in discussion with attorney at law Thiruni Marambe, and we were talking about gender-based violence. Unfortunately, ma'am, this is our final segment, so I think we need to pack whatever is the most essential pieces of information right into these few minutes so that we can actually convey the final message to our viewers who have been watching intently so far. Ma'am, before we get into the international context, I think it's important for us to actually understand the support services that are available for people that are actually suffering from these types of violence. If you could walk us through a few of the actual support services that we have seen, what is the biggest one, specifically when we mention the hotline as well, if you could enlighten us on that.
Yeah, as I said that they are about to bring about care centers, and that is something that we should have established long time back. Right, so that is one of the reasons that, because this is a very sentimental moment, law can correct things mechanically. So law is the best mechanism to correct anything that goes wrong in the society. But looking at the whole process of it, the emotions and the sentiments attached to it, so it should not be the conventional way of behavior of law that should approach to this. So care centers, the government suggestion to establish care centers is going to be one of the major, significant, important factor. Plus, in the current process, in the present context, there's a 24/7 hotline, helpline is working. Number, of course, 1938. So the women, again, that is focused on to eradicate gender-based violence, so that assistance could be get effectively.
Right, so we have options if there is a dire need to actually contact and help. Apart from actually facing the legal system, we can go the route of getting help through other means, especially through this hotline that is about to be coming into operation. I think since now we understand that there are certain aspects that we can turn to if unfortunately, God forbid, there is any sort of issue in that aspect. Could you please walk us through, now we have to focus on the international context for this specific segment, of course. when it comes to the international, the global context, where do we stand, ma'am, as a country? Are we going the right way? Is there a lot more for us to improve? Are we backwards or are we forwards?
So we are signatories, Sri Lanka is a signatory to many conventions and treaties concerned to gender as well as women's in respect of women's best interest. So out of them, there's this convention called CEDAW Convention, right? A convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. So it has, we have kind of ratified it in 1981. So it has given the government a responsibility to take necessary and responsible mechanisms to eliminate. That's a very broad and a very serious terminology that goes into that convention. So that due responsibility is there with the government, and also it says that for every 4 years, after every 4 years, the government has to report it to the UN about the precautions or the mechanisms that they have taken in order to eliminate such violations. And so they will not blankly take it. They also have their own research in order to ensure that we are into it. Apart from the government sector, when it comes to stakeholders, private entities, so they have currently, maybe within past 10 years, they have become very active in visiting to villages and to like they have they have financially even supported into programs to encourage girls for women empowerment, education, and to grant the message or convey the message of the financial stability, the importance of financial stability. So there are a lot of awareness programs are going on. So within past 10 years, especially with the help of the stakeholders and the private entities. And apart from that, United Nations have established sustainable development goals to be achieved by their member states by 2030. So there are 17 goals to be achieved, which includes even education, climate change, health, agriculture, and so on. So then out of these 17 goals, goal number 5 is gender equality. So for that, so there again a government responsibility, the state responsibility to ensure that by 2030 that we are going to achieve at least a particular or a certain level of equality in respect of gender equality. So I hope according to the current index of gender inequality, out of 188 countries, we are 73. We represent 73. So there's an obvious, like positive stance could be obviously seen in order to, so there are different levels, like under different circumstances, different institutions, they attempt their very best to avoid this imbalance. Even like again, if you compare the present context, the girls are much aware. So their social exposure is very much better than years before, maybe 10-15 years before. So they know the value of education and financial stability. So those are the main focus. Even these international treaties and conventions are focusing on, because without these it's very difficult for us to upgrade a personality. Without knowing such importance. So not everyone will equally show the ability of showing success in their life through education. So that is like, but then again, so there are substitutions for those, right? So then to groom your personality in different levels in order to find opportunities to do that. So in the modern structure, the modern, the current awareness programs and whatever that is available gives a way better exposure for them to find themselves. So girls' education, whatever it is pivotally important.
Of course, the more you know about the situation, the more awareness there is, the more you can defend yourself.
That makes you to feel that, it gives you self-confidence to feel that you are important, and it will bring confidence, establish confidence to resist for unnecessary things that may come to your life.
Right. Being educated about the issue is the key in order to prevent any sort of subconscious or maybe unnoticed discriminations towards you. Of course, if you don't know it's happening, then obviously you're not going to be able to take any action on it. I think that's an important aspect as well. Even though we're closing in to the finality of this discussion, I'd like to ask you, ma'am, as a lawyer and also as, of course, the both of us are, we're in part of a vulnerable demographic where we are more prone to such issues as we just spoke about it. What is your advice to someone in such an unfortunate situation? What should their first steps be when it comes to actually seeking justice?
The first advice is not to tolerate and immediately report it to someone. I'm not talking about all these legal mechanisms, but someone that you could trust with. And resistance. Those three are very important, right? So then the tolerance and resistance are the major factors that you can discourage such situations. But when it comes to working place, like workplace, if you take workplace harassment, people hardly resist because of the, they might tolerating and they might bearing such pain due to financial factors. They don't want to move, so they would have taken up that job with utter difficulty. So therefore, they don't want to move from there onwards. So that again encourages culprits and abusers. So the first thing, your own intolerance and resistance is what will kill these abusers. Kill in the sense that
metaphorically,
so that is what will contribute to discourage such. Otherwise, you yourself contributing to nourish them.
Right. I think that was the perfect note to unfortunately end this discussion on. Despite how informative it is, time has come against us. I believe our viewers would have been able to take home some key information relating to this topic and how it shouldn't be a taboo, and we should really be putting more spotlight on it, not just in a legal sense, but also on a personal level as well, with individuality. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking the time to explain this to us. All right, well, this discussion, I believe, is clear to you now, that it's evidently clear that gender-based violence should not be a taboo that is swept under the rug. And we as citizens of Sri Lanka have a responsibility of opening the public forum and having uncomfortable but progressive discussions within our communities to better the protection of the most vulnerable in our nation. We leave you tonight with the words of former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan. Violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation, and it is perhaps the most pervasive. It knows no boundaries of geography, culture, or wealth. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality, development, and peace. Well, that is all we have for you tonight on Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/otherderana English. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.